Hello friends! So today I really wanted to come on and talk to you about something that it's very personal in terms of my experience with my recovery journey, but I wonder if it may be something that's useful to anyone else or something that somebody else experiences. So as always, with anything and everything that I share, please do take what helps and leave the rest. Everyone's journey is unique, and some of what I share won't feel relevant to you, where some of it may. So, as I say, take what helps and leave the rest. But today, I wanted to talk about something I have touched on previously in my symptoms of mental hunger, examples of mental hunger video. And it is this idea that in my recovery journey, I learnt to recognize general overthinking as a hunger signal. So, what I mean by this is that yes, there's the overthinking about food that occurs and that is very blatantly mental hunger. But I actually learnt to recognize that when I found myself in this kind of spiraling, ruminating place about thoughts that were related to all sorts of stuff, but there were some kind of common themes for me. So one of them was jobs and career, and then another of them was like friends and relationships and how good I was at being a friend and what I'd said in places and what I hadn't said. And then the other thing, actually, one of the others was how I was going to, in the amount of time we have on this planet, do all the things I wanted to do. So just generally worrying about all the books that I wanted to read and all the films I wanted to watch and all the places I want to visit, and actually getting into a rumination spiral, worrying about how I was going to fit all of those things into my one life that I really wanted to do whilst I was here. And those are kind of just three examples of common areas where the rumination circled, but it was just generally an awareness that when I noticed myself thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, often with a slightly negative, anxious twist, that for me was something I learned to recognize as a hunger signal. Now, the best way for me to describe the shift that happened here is, if you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're lying in bed and there's something that's going on and you're worrying about it, and at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're on your own in the dark, that worry just feels almost paralyzing. It's just going round and round. You've got like a washing machine head about that thing. It's spiraling into all sorts of different ways. You just can't contain it. It just feels like this overwhelming, ruminating, worrying, anxious place. And then if you do manage to get back to sleep and then you wake up at, 8 o'clock, that worry isn't necessarily just magicked away. It's not like the worry's gone, but suddenly you've got such a greater sense of clarity and perspective over it, and just an ability to sort of go, okay, that's a worry, but I can do something about that. But it doesn't feel overwhelming, but I don't feel paralyzed about it. That's the shift that I recognized when I started to notice that this ruminating, this general overthinking, was a symptom of me being hungry. So I would notice it, go and think, right, okay, check in. Am I tired? Am I hungry? Could I eat? Right, I'm going to go and do that. Go and do those things. And I would, more often than not, and I really do mean that, like more often than not, notice this quite significant shift that happened. And it's not as if I'm saying that going and eating just magicked the worries away. Sometimes it actually did. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I would go from just being in this really frenzied state, worrying about something that I'd said to someone 2 years ago, to then having eaten and being like, oh, actually, I'm not worried about that. But often, actually, the worry wouldn't just magic away. It would still be there. Say jobs and careers. That is something that has historically, and certainly through my recovery, it was something that was a background theme of worry for me. And it didn't just magic away. But once I'd eaten, once I had kind of got to the nub and kind of gone, hey, let's check in. Let's make sure that I am looking after myself. Let's get honouring this hunger. Let's do this. It was amazing how I'd noticed that shift from frenzied, paralysed, overwhelmed rumination to, okay, this is a worry for me, but I can do something about this. This isn't paralysing. I've got some clarity over this. I've got some perspective. It was amazing, that shift. And so I suppose what I'm trying to say and share here is that actually this was something that I found incredibly useful, especially for me when I was quitting quasi. And I think this is because at that point, my eating disorder had learnt some very effective ways to create action paralysis for me. It had kind of learnt that if it came knocking at the front door with very obvious eating disorder stuff, I was like, no, thank you, I don't do that. But it had learnt what my windows were, you know, what the chimney was. It had learnt those ways that it could get inside where I wouldn't maybe necessarily immediately be like, oh, that's eating disorder, no. And this was one of them. This was absolutely one of them, that if I allowed myself to get too hungry, and if with that eating disorder then ramped up in noise, I would get into this ruminating cycle of worrying about all sorts of just general life things with particular themes about jobs or friendships or how many books I was going to be able to read, etc. It knew that actually that was a really great place that it could then keep me inactive from a recovery perspective, because whilst I was overthinking and worrying about that, I would quite literally feel like, no, I have to sort this out. Like, I'm not going to be able to be my happy, free, healthy, nourished self, like, while there's this worry. Like, it would almost distract me entirely on this topic. And in recovery, when I started to recognize this pattern, and I started to notice that when I got on honoring my hunger and actually going, you know what, I think that this is a hunger signal, and I started eating according to that, I noticed that shift. And I started to become really canny to the fact that this was just one of the ways in which eating disorder was coming around the back. You know, it knew it couldn't get in through the front door, and maybe even the back door. It was like, she knows about that now. But this was a window that it had worked out was a really great way to get in. And that before having that awareness about it, it was something where I just absolutely was like, oh, goodness, okay, yeah, come in. Yeah, oh, I'm genuinely worried about this. This is a real thing. And I think this is where, you know, those particular themes, they were genuine places where I was concerned. They were genuine things where I had worries, whether it was that I'd made a comment to a friend a while ago and it suddenly had come up to my mind and thought, oh, that was really mean. Why did I say that? Or whether it was that real theme of worrying about jobs and purpose and career that would just come up again, and it was an authentic worry I had. It was like it kind of piggybacked and hijacked those in particular as a focus for the rumination. So I hope that kind of makes sense. I feel like I've sort of brought two themes in there. The idea that general overthinking, so non-food focused overthinking, rumination, anxiety, was something that for me I learned to recognise as a hunger signal. And therefore, when I actually then honoured it as a hunger signal, I noticed how there was that shift in worry, not necessarily magicking it away, but that shift of the equivalent of that 2 o'clock in the morning waking up and completely paralysed to you wake up at 8, 9 and suddenly you've got a bit of perspective. That kind of shift in the worry. And also I've brought in here this idea of starting to get curious and pay attention to the different ways in which your eating disorder shows up. And so maybe you're at a point in your recovery where if it does knock on the front door, you're like, no, I know what that is. No, thank you. And maybe even the back door, maybe it comes around there and you're like, no, don't try that one. I know what you're doing. But maybe there are windows that are ajar. Maybe there is a chimney opening. Maybe there are different ways that your eating disorder is learning and has worked out that it can get in. And part of recovery is about getting really critical and curious about where those might be. And then once you recognize them, using that awareness proactively. So I hope that all makes sense, and I hope that's helpful, even if just to one person who's watching this who relates. As I said at the start, I recognise that there is so much nuance in the recovery journey, and that stuff that I talk about from a personal perspective really might not relate to some. But at the end of the day, I really want this to be a space where I talk about all of the different areas of my experience. And it may well be that there are some of you out there who can relate to this, and that this might be something you've already recognised, or it could be something that listening to this gets you curious about it and you start thinking, I wonder if my eating disorder is doing that. I wonder if my hunger is showing up like that. So I hope that's helpful. I look forward to speaking to you again next week, and wherever you are, whatever you're doing, have a wonderful day. Till next time.